Hello, class. This is Kyle Lopez. This is my informed consent form number 3. It's going to be a PowerPoint presentation for Dr. Jenkins. Throughout this PowerPoint, I'm going to talk about informed consent clauses, multicultural ethics, self-awareness, and bracketing, components of informed consent, highlighting these components, and then ethical components as well. So let's get started. So informed consent clauses. Regarding the question, I didn't really see anything that needed to be really considered specifically with Reza and Farah. One thing I would consider is that if it is marriage counseling, which in my mind that is the scenario that's going to happen, the details are a little bit different, and that needs to be explained to them pretty clearly. So one-on-one counseling is a lot different because it's just counselor and the person. When there's multiple people within the group, the dynamic is a bit different. And as a counselor, I need to make sure I'm not picking sides. And as I'm working with it through them, there needs to be an understanding that it's not individual, it's the group interests that's best in mind. They are here for family counseling, as the scenario states, and I think that they both want to improve their marriage, and because of that, explaining the proper details is important. With confidentiality, it's always a risk that one of the two may share information within session, outside of session. For me, I wouldn't do that. I would explain to them that this would probably be a bad thing to do. It would kind of disclosing details outside of session could hurt their progress together if they are making progress. So moving forward with multicultural ethics, there's a couple things that I would consider before counseling Reza and Farah. Being a Christian, it does bring up points where there may be religious differences, and that could lead to not necessarily conflicts within session, but conflicts within myself. With that in mind, it's important that I'm aware of this. But I think having this perspective that's different from theirs and they have a perspective different from mine could lead to good dialogue and open up doors for progress between the two of them. I don't plan to self-disclose, but if the topic of religion comes up, and I would assume it would, considering that a big point of conflict is religious issues, I would approach it very cautiously, but in a manner with grace. Another thing would be informing myself of their culture. I could read resources, I can engage with people from the religion outside of counseling. I could even go to a mosque if I feel comfortable enough and kind of just talk to somebody who I would consider a professional, I guess, in that realm. Someone who's knowledgeable or an expert. Moving forward to self-awareness and bracketing. So the ACA Code of Ethics states to not impose my beliefs. So going back to like the multicultural ethics, this is kind of a thing where I'm not going to impose any beliefs. If I'm asked about said beliefs, there is always consideration to self-disclose. I think it's important to discern whether this is appropriate or not at the time. An area where I would obviously need to be a little bit more proactive is how women are treated within Islam. Again, I'm not culturally competent in this area of Islam, or just in Islam in general, so it's important that I inform myself again, so I don't counter-transfer. And it's important to note this as well because it is a focal point with Reza and Farah, because there is conflict within their marriage because of how he treats her and how their son is kind of being brought up to act the same way as Reza. So components of informed consent. So goals and directions have to be discussed. They need to understand, and I need to explain clearly to them that this is an ongoing process. There is an expectation that the expectation is that they want to work on their marriage, and because of this, I think that gives us a very sizable groundwork to kind of plan what we're trying to work on. Some areas of conflicts will arise, and I think it's important to recognize this. And it's okay that there's conflict within the session, because this conflict they're going to have to work through. And as a professional counselor, I'm going to have to walk them through this. Like an area would be, Farah thinks she is devout. Reza doesn't really see like she's filling this role. That's just an example. And again, addressing within counseling for families and marriage. The goal is not an individual goal, it's a collective goal. And I believe the collective goal is their marriage and kind of establishing strength in that and health. So highlighting some of these opponents, it's important to recognize that informed consent is not just the paper form or online form, that it's actually an ongoing process. For example, it needs to be verbally explained as well within the first session. I would say even the second session, making sure that the information shared is understandable and understood. Talking with Reza and Farah about how this process will look. As I mentioned before, agreeing on a goal, which in this case it appears to be resolving the conflicts within their marriage. Making sure this goal is clear and concise is a part of the informed consent process, and this is an ongoing process. Again, vocally explaining to them that confidentiality applies to both of them within the session, and information shared in session stays in the session. It needs to be explained that there's an exclusion of various abuses, child abuse, which obviously would be a concern, elder abuse, attempt to hurt someone else or others, stuff like that will have to be perfectly clearly and concisely explained. Another area would be explaining that while the goal is to improve their marriage, there will be instances where conflict and tension will arise. Sadness, frustration, anger may be something that comes up as well. It's always important to remember that it is a collaborative effort between the two of them and the counselor to make progress. And so some ethical concerns to wrap up. There's always going to be some, but being perfectly clear, it's crucial to highlight. What can be discussed is crucial to highlight. Implication of abuse is a means of being reported to authorities. This is not permissible. It needs to be explained perfectly clear that this cannot happen. Divorce and subpoenas, and again, it's important not to impose my own ideals or religion on them. With that in mind, I need to understand theirs as well.